Hey YouTube, in this video we're going to be talking about whether or not you should upgrade now or at least upgrade relatively soon, depending on when the next gen card is going to come out. If you're on a card from 2015 or maybe 2014, depending on when you upgraded last. But this is going to be specifically doing a deep dive into how the R9 Fury has aged and how well it can handle 1080p gaming in 2022. So if you're interested in seeing that, stay tuned. So with the R9 Fury Nitro, so this one in particular is the Nitro. I had the Tri-X. The Tri-X is definitely quieter than this card. But yeah, so the Fury card is really good at 1080p gaming. Better than an RX 480. In fact, it's basically a 1060 6GB, but it just has 4GB of HBM memory instead. But this thing gave you a lot of like brute force core power, but it was kind of limited on the memory, so it's 4GB. So I wouldn't recommend this for 1440p. I never did, and I feel like where AMD kind of botched the launch on this card was they kind of touted it as a 1440p gaming card. And I think that was a mistake. They should have just kept quiet on that and just said that it's a good card that beats the GTX 980, because that's exactly what it did. It hands down beat the 980 pretty much across the board, but it did lose out to the 980 Ti, so it couldn't claim the crown spot. Even the Fury X version basically lost to the 980 Ti in most cases. There were probably a few outliers where it could actually win, but those were few and far between. So Fury, though, was... I feel like this is an underrated, underappreciated generation of cards from AMD. I feel like a lot of people paid more attention to the Hawaii GPUs and the Tahiti GPUs, and then by this time, Fury was kind of slow to come out. It was like 2015, so NVIDIA had, you know, Maxwell from like 2014. These cards, kind of like Intel's Arc generation, to be honest. They were kind of slow to come out, and they finally launched, and then there weren't a whole lot of them because they were using HBM. But their availability was pretty decent at the time. The same can't be said for the following generation, because Vega 64 ran into crypto mining. The crypto mining craze of 2017 gobbled these cards up. But these cards were also kind of late to come out as well, just like the Intel Arc GPUs. So, but we'll get into those in the next video. But for today, we're going to be looking at how well this card has aged. This was the first card to introduce that flow-through design where you can see like the air from the fan goes straight up through the fin array there and exhausts out upward that way. So the Fury Tri-X and the Nitro Fury were the first cards. So Sapphire was the innovator there. They were the first ones that did that. Just a little history lesson on the flow-through design, because a lot of people think NVIDIA did it. That's not the case. It was actually Sapphire. So yeah, so Sapphire is a really good brand. If you couldn't already tell, I have a lot of Sapphire cards. You can't really go wrong with them. They never really let me down, and then this is no exception. So anyway, let's roll those benchmarks and we'll come back with the conclusion. So we're going to start with Final Fantasy. We're going to skip Genshin Impact because that game already does 60 FPS with this graphics card. It was pretty much there with the 290X, and the 290X is indicative of how the RX 480 and the GTX 1060 perform. So this card is faster than both of those, so it's kind of pointless to test Genshin Impact. Okay, so we go outside and just kind of flying around here a bit. So you can see with the frame rate uncapped, it runs really well. So 1080p, this card is kind of where I draw the line for this game. Like, I feel like this is the sort of game where I would personally just cap it at 60 if I was playing on this monitor, because you're going to be at a solid 60 and you're saving a lot on power consumption and heat output and that sort of thing. So the card itself is quiet. It's not making any noise in terms of fan noise. But yeah, this is kind of where I draw the limit on Final Fantasy XIV. Any sort of testing, kind of like Genshin Impact, if you go beyond this card and you're playing this particular game at 1080p resolution, the upgrade does absolutely nothing for you. So this is where you would need to upgrade your monitor. Now, I know from personal experience that this is the time where I did upgrade my monitor. So I used to use this card, this R9 Fury Nitro from Sapphire, as my daily driver. But then I upgraded to 1440p on the eve of Stormblood back in 2017. And in a couple of months after Stormblood came out, I think it was actually, I'm trying to think, yeah, I think it was like a month after Stormblood had been out, the Vega 64 launched. So I was able to upgrade to Vega 64. So, and that solved the issue with 1440p, because I'll tell you guys, the R9 Fury does not do 60 FPS consistently at 1440p in Final Fantasy XIV. It never did. But it's interesting because it's kind of on that threshold, right, where it handles 1080p max settings, and you can see it's the Fury right there. But if you go, if we make its maximum, if we make the FPS uncapped again, you know, now we're running at almost 100 FPS, and we're 1080p. Now, when you go to 1440, it's such a significant jump that it's like, oh, I'm at 100 on 1080p. But once I go to 1440, it drops to like 55 to 65, somewhere in there. So it's like right on the line, and it's like, yeah, it can do it, but it's one of those things where it's like it doesn't do it well. So you might as well keep this card for 1080p gaming, and you don't really need to upgrade. So let's move on to a game that is more modern and more graphically demanding, and see where that brings us. Alright, looks like I spoke too soon. Although, it's pretty close. It's almost able to do it. Yeah, it's almost there. You can see it's like on the threshold, right? Like the lowest I saw was like 57. 55, there we go, 55. With all the grass. So 55. So the low is 55. It looks like 55 to 60 is the range. So we're almost there. The R9 Fury came so close to being a solid 60 all the time in this game. 54, the new low is 54. But you can see, like, it's playable. It's definitely playable. Wow. All right, we're back with Elden Ring. Now, for some reason, Fraps doesn't work on here, so we're just gonna have to eyeball it. But if Sophie 2 wasn't constant 60, this game's definitely not gonna be constant 60. Knowing this game. Alright, and already I can feel the drop. But this might be the initial load, though. Honestly, whoa, there was some judder right there. It was loading some assets in, though. But honestly, I can't really... This doesn't really feel any better than the 290X. Like, I can't really tell that it's improved. Alright, let's try to play a little bit longer this time, just to see if this is just initial loading. One thing I am noticing, though, and this is the cool thing about having the test bed like right there on the side, I can see that the SSD is constantly streaming in assets because I see the hard drive LED indicator constantly blinking. And I also hear coil whine from the GPU when it's doing those big loads. So it seems like It seems like this is just it's just Elden Ring being Elden Ring. It's just being From Software's unoptimized mess. But the game, like, honestly though, like, it doesn't... You get used to these games being like this, and it sure is better than Blighttown on the PS3. So, it's not terrible, but it doesn't really feel smooth. But it's hard for me to blame it on the graphics card, to be honest. It's almost like it's the game. Let's go over here. Here, let me get off my horse also. Alright, bring everybody, dude. Bring everybody. We'll crush everybody. Alright, so... yeah, it's kind of a stuttery mess right there, but I don't know how much of that is the graphics card versus the game, but I remember when I was playing the game on the 6900 XT, it's not this bad, so it is the graphics card having some struggling issues there. It's struggling to keep up. Yeah, this doesn't feel like 60. I feel like this is like 43. This feels around like mid 40s. Maybe low 40s even. Maybe like upper 30s. I wish I could get fraps on here, but yeah, it doesn't really feel like it's that good. Okay, down here? This is super smooth. So, yeah, it's... okay, so it's probably a GPU thing. Because it's really smooth in that room. It's when you come out here, then it's kind of janky. Like right there, see that light blinking? Oh, that's the SSD, but it's basically your storage light indicator that it's loading stuff in. Now, the other games weren't doing this as much. Now I'm going to start running around on the horse. So I'm galloping on Torrent right now, and you can see it's blinking like crazy, and that's because it's streaming in game assets and textures in part of the world. So I feel like it's more of like a game engine limitation. Now if I stop moving, well, I guess it's just going to do what it wants to do. It's probably loading stuff that's far away, because I'm looking around the map. So yeah, that's basically Elden Ring in a nutshell. On R9 Fury at 1080p, it is playable like a console. Alright, so Nioh 2. This game is kind of weird. I set the cap to 120 FPS, but the game seems to force VSync for some reason. It's almost like you can't run it above 60 FPS if your monitor doesn't support refresh rates above 60 FPS. It's kind of weird. This is kind of a strange game. It kind of forces VSync. So, but yeah, okay, let's get into another combat situation. Zuna drop, it's so awesome. This game is so cool. Why am I on fire? Alright, so Tales of Arise. So here we are at like 90 plus FPS on this game with the R9 Fury at 1080p resolution, so now we're down to 80. So again, we've kind of reached the max for this game. So I feel like this is a game that you don't really need to test it with Vega and beyond at this resolution, because now you're reaching a point where, you know, it's gonna perform with diminishing returns at this resolution. So I feel like Tales of Arise is a pretty good one where I think we found the max. I would say it kind of maxes out on R9 Fury. Anything beyond this, like Vega, you'd be looking at 1440p resolution for this game. For it to actually be a worthy upgrade. So that isn't to say that you can't upgrade. I'm just saying, you know, like if you're on a 1080p monitor and you're thinking of upgrading, but you're not going to change your monitor, you might as well not upgrade if you're playing games like this or a lot of other single-player RPGs, you know, like Dragon's Quest, Octopath Traveler. The new Star Ocean game that's coming out is probably not going to be that much more demanding than this. So again, it's like the main reason to upgrade for the R9 Fury would be for driver support. Now, this is what I was interested to see, because I know with the DirectX 12 client, the DirectX 12 client vastly improves performance in this game, especially on the Radeon cards, which excel in DirectX 12. So you can see here now we're managing over 60. But it looks like it's right on the line. So there we go. So 60 something. Let's attack these guys. Let's avoid that monster. I don't want to fight him. You guys can see we're doing 63, 66. I am seeing it dip into the upper 50s, just over the line. But it is significantly improved over the 290X. So again, this is where I feel like this card came out in the middle of 2015. So it is definitely time to look at upgrading, just because of how old the card is. There's no warranty support. There's even still no driver support, because this card is considered end of life, end of support. So, you know, you can't upgrade your drivers anymore on this card. So it is what it is. It's done. He's Monstrum Nox, and I feel like I should probably have some. Well, I'll just leave it on the max, because that's what I've been testing on the previous ones. So we'll stay like that for consistency. Alright, so let's see if the bridge still kills the FPS like it has done for like all the... Okay, so we're still seeing that weird drop to like 55. But I will say that it's not nearly as noticeable. It's definitely not as juddery as Elden Ring was, and it's not as noticeable. So now we're noticing the dip only dips to 59. Whereas before we were seeing drops to 54, somewhere around there, on the 290X. So this graphics card has almost been able to brute force its way past that weird unoptimized sort of spot right there where there's too much tessellation. Alright, so overall, what were my thoughts on the R9 Fury, in particular the Sapphire Nitro? So it's a lot quieter than I remember. I don't know if that's because we're running this with the side panel off, but this card was definitely quieter than the Power Color PCS Plus 290X that I tested prior to this. Interesting thing is it does have a button here for like another BIOS. If you press that in, it switches it to a different BIOS. I don't know if that's the silent BIOS or the performance one. Maybe that's the reason why it was a lot quieter this time around. But what has not aged well on the card, these stickers have air bubbles forming in them. I try to push them down, but they eventually come back up. So that's kind of annoying, but that's just a cosmetic thing. So I guess any AIBs out there watching this video, don't do this. Don't put stickers on your graphics card as part of the design. It's not going to age well. All the heat cycles on the shroud are going to cause this to get bubbles like that over time. So definitely not recommended. Or if you are going to use stickers, do them in a different way where they're not textured like this. I think this is a sticker and this is aged fine, but that certainly hasn't. But anyway, you know, it's a dual BIOS card. relatively small. It was the first card. The Fury was known for this flow-through design for those who actually owned one at the time. It's a really good card. It's an underrated card. For 1080p, it's totally fine. Even in today, I feel like most games... Now, if you were going to play something like Cyberpunk 2077, then this card is probably not going to be enough, even at 1080p, without, you know, dropping it down to medium. But even then, I feel like the HBM has stood the test of time. You know, 512 gigabytes of bandwidth on the memory is quite a lot. 4096-bit bus. Really, really big. So that's it for the Nitro. You can see the Nitro was in that transitionary phase, just like Pascal, where they started opting to put more display ports on the graphics card and less DVI ports, which was a very good welcome change. But anyway, that's going to be the R9 Fury. This was the Nitro. So the next graphics card that we're going to be looking at is going to be the Nitro Vega 64, again from Sapphire. So this card is going to be an interesting one, so stay tuned for that.